together to talk a little bit about technology, and especially technology as in relation to insurance. Now, maybe just for welcome, first of all, to everyone, thanks to all the speakers who made time for us to be here over the 2 days. We've got more than 18 speakers lined up, everybody well prepared to put in their bit of information, their experience and knowledge, etc. And please remember that we would like the audience to participate and to provide us with some comments, questions, etc. as we go. It's quite important for us that you guys participate as well. So please feel free, no question too difficult for this panel of speakers. So I wanted to remind everyone as well that we at the offices of Santam in Alice Lane in Sandton, we've got a cocktail function, in-person networking this afternoon. Seats are limited. You can arrive you have to register on the insurtechconference.co.za site. There's no cost involved. It's at 4:30 at Santam offices, Alice Lane. We hope to see you there for a bit of networking. Thank you to Santam for providing that to us. And thanks to all the sponsors. You've seen the sponsors on the screen. They've all made this possible. Without them, we can't host events like that. So thank you very much for that. So before we kick off, maybe I just want to give a little bit of background so that you know where we come from for these 2 days. The idea this year with the InsurTech conference, or the TechFest as we call it, because we had it over a few sessions, not just the 2 days, is that we sort of, with guys like Tavio Roxo and Andre from Genesis, Tavio from ALS, who try and tell us that we're in the business of technology. We are telling them we're in the business of insurance. And we've gone back to the fundamentals of insurance and looked at how do we build a successful insurance business, and then we leverage technology. And so this is the tension between us over the 2 days, as we're going to be discussing how do we leverage each other's strengths and make the industry much better. So our first lineup for today in this fascinating session is we're going to just look at the digitization strategies as to what path do you follow, how do you get there, where do you start, etc. So we've unpacked it a little bit over the 3 days, and Tavio is going to try and sort of bring everything together for us. So first, we're going to have Tavio Roxo, the CEO and co-founder of ALS Software. Then on the panel, we're going to be joined by Amritha Reddy, the head of fraud at TransUnion Africa. And we're also going to have Robin Farrell, the vice president of international insurance for TransUnion Africa. So that's going to be our panel, and let's see what we can get out of this session. So from the start, prepare your questions and your comments, etc. So Tavio, over to you.
Thank you, Tony.
Pleasure. Welcome, Tavio.
Thank you. Good morning, delegates. Well, thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning. Welcome back to the annual TechFest conference, May 2023. So, I mean, when a conference like this is put together, the preparations start months in advance. So Tony and his team are engaging with the industry in order to establish common themes and areas that many are grappling with. In this year's preparations, Tony came to me and he said that he had been speaking to many intermediaries, insurers, UMAs, administrators, and that although there was a recognition that they wanted to upgrade their technology, they did not necessarily know how to do so or where to start. So Tony has asked me to address you today on the building blocks of a successful digitization strategy. So as one of the co-founders of an InsurTech software company, that has grown from 0 to 1 billion posted financial transactions, we've learned a fair amount of lessons over the last 17 years around data, tech stack, functionality attributes, things that are an absolute necessity if you are considering a journey of moving to any technology. So I have you for just under 30 minutes today. And if you'll allow me, I'm going to lead you through some of the learnings that of the last 17 years. These learnings will provide you with a tool set that you will need as you navigate your technological journey for the years to come. Okay, so let's start. Let's cast our mind back to 2007. I use this year as I believe it was an inflection point in all our personal technology journeys. It was the year the iPhone was launched for the first time, and it was also the year that we started our software. You'll remember at the time there was Blackberry, Nokia, and Sony Erickson. They were the dominant players, and they had the gold standard for communication at the time. They were analog phones. And at their time, they revolutionized the communication world in that if you had one of those devices in your pocket, not only did you look cool, but you were able to communicate with anyone on the planet with a call or SMS. Yes, SMS. You guys remember SMSs? Please call me. So I don't think anyone does that anymore. Anyway, it is strange that if we look at the cell phone landscape today, neither BlackBerry, Nokia, nor Sony Ericsson are relevant players in the market. All three were really big businesses at the time. They had combined had penetrated over 80% of the cell phone market at the time. They never believed they would be displaced. So what ultimately led to their demise, however, was a failure to realize that there was a step change happening. Just like there is a step change happening now in the tech and the insurance industry. You see, the step change in that industry at the time was the move from an analog or feature phone to a smartphone and ecosystems. At the time, I remember doing a fair amount of research around technology being used in the insurance industry and the various customer and stakeholder digital journeys, institutional, group, individual business, both B2C and B2B. What was apparent then, and what is still very much in existence today, albeit to a lesser extent perhaps, was in fact that many stakeholders in the insurance value chain had a very clunky, manual, and frictionful journey in order to execute on any of the administrative tasks in the insurance life cycle. More research seemed to indicate that one of the primary reasons for this clunky, frictionful journey was that there was a structural limitation. That structural limitation is what I would call a fragmented technology landscape, not dissimilar to an analog phone. You see, a pricing specialist in an insurance company would use a pricing tool built specifically for their requirements, and that pricing tool would work well. But that would be limited to pricing and product design for their functional world only. At underwriting, an onboarding team in an insurance company would then seek to use another technology service or product, or multiple, depending on the channel, which was appropriate for them to efficiently onboard a new customer. This tool was developed specifically for the area of the business, as underwriting and onboarding is an important part of the business of insurance, of course. The policy servicing department, however, now had a view of an incepted policy and would like to perform different actions relating to the policy, like policy amendments, upgrades, downgrades, general requests. In order to do this, they, of course, would use another technology. But if that's not enough, the same became apparent for claims. A specific system would be incorporated into the already fragmented technology landscape to manage and process claims. Of course, as claims is the work engine of an insurance business, a fair amount of development and customized rules and processes would be developed into that claim system. All of these systems work well in their area of control. But one of the issues, of course, was that they would always have to defer to a financial system in order to operate. So the business would have another financial system, software, technology that supported the various business units. In some instances, the module would have some financial transactions embedded. In other instances, they would not. In addition to this, typically the collection of the premium and the payment of the claims would happen outside of these systems. So another system or technology. So notwithstanding that complex system array, there was still a need to get an overall picture of the business. So yet another system would have to be deployed across the entire organization in order to do the reporting. Data lakes, data warehouses, data repositories. We all know the terms. Essentially, the amalgamation of big multiple data sets from multiple systems into one place so you can get an overall view. So in order to avoid all of the above, to get an overall picture of the entire business, we sometimes notice that some companies would then simply bypass it all and use Excel. I know, Excel. Anyways, the biggest problem with Excel is that it's got a limitation of 1 million rows and 16,000 columns. So if you want to be bigger than that, then you might have to reconsider your choice of application. Then there is another little problem with Excel. It's not a system. It's a static record at a point in time. Of course, all of the above is not ideal, technologically speaking, and inefficiencies manifest into the environment. So firstly, it creates a software world in your business where you have multiple resources in different parts of your organizations developing different skill sets in order to operate and service different systems and architectures. This is costly, and it is not an efficient way to allocate resources and to operate. Secondly, this fragmented software environment does not allow for you as an insurer, administrator, or broker to create any coherent digital journey within your organization for a customer or stakeholder. But thirdly, and possibly the biggest problem of all, is that there is a misalignment of data. You see, with the misalignment of data, i.e., one system providing a record which deviates from the second system's record, it creates a world where there is a fair amount of time and effort spent by expensive resources within your respective organizations trying to extract, transform, and align data to provide something as simple as a report that accurately depicts the truth. So the subtle or not so subtle effect, of course, is that ultimately business loses faith in the data and the systems, and with it, trust. If a business cannot trust its data, how can external stakeholders? I digress. In the book Modern Monopolies, the author, I think, was Nicholas Johnson. The author sets out to explain some of the characteristics of the world's most successful platform businesses like Facebook, Airbnb, Amazon. It is telling that all these organizations did not exist 15 years ago, and yet today all are ubiquitous in our lives. Another example on how tech fundamentally changes the landscape with a step change into a new technology mindset. In this case, a platform business versus the traditional business models of the time. So the author goes on to explain how in the initial years, 2003, Amazon really struggled to gain traction. You'll recall they started selling some books, and then started branching off into the creation of a platform for sellers to sell their product and buyers to buy their product. Basically, the Amazon we know today. The observation by the author was that it was only when Amazon introduced ratings for both sellers and buyers did the platform really start to take off. You see, with the introduction of a seemingly benign rating functionality, it changed the game. Now, as a buyer, you could have 100% confidence that the seller was in fact going to deliver the items that you bought. A seller could only defraud one person, and they would be called out, and that would be the end. The author attributes the introduction of reviews and transparency to the seller and the buyer, with the result being that it created ultimate trust in the platform. And we know people have a propensity to transact when there is trust. So, how do we build trust in our organizations, and by implication, build trust with the various external stakeholders, and importantly, the ultimate policyholder? Well, a good starting point to building trust is to be transparent and inclusive. And technology is the ultimate in providing transparency and inclusiveness. It is with technology that any customer can go down to the most granular detail of data and have comfort on a journey that is predictable, reliable, fast, and inclusive. If the customer has multiple interactions with your organization and they are all predictable, reliable, and fast, this builds trust in your organization and in us as an industry. Okay, so how do you build a technology that can create trust in your organization? Well, I believe you need to start with an end vision in mind. And the end vision for me, can be nothing less than taking a customer or a client or a stakeholder on a digital journey within your organization, very similar to that of Amazon and Takealot. Buy, service, claim, and catering for every other request in between. An end-to-end journey. It is only with an end-to-end journey that you, as an insurance business, can build trust and genuinely build scale. I say this is what we all have to strive for, because if you look around at the youngsters today, and I'm this gray hair, I'm the second oldest person in my business, George, they do everything online. I mean, I have previously made mention of my daughter who at the age of 9 was meeting with her friend who lives overseas in a digital world called Minecraft, and they were meeting at a house that my daughter had built in one of her worlds. I mean, my daughter, my son, and their entire generation will not transact the way I do or you do in 10 years. So we have to start putting in place those building blocks that will allow us to do exactly what our vision requires, to be relevant as a business in years to come. See, as we go on this IT journey, perhaps a recognition that Africa as a continent has a history of leapfrogging the world using tech has to alert us all in the room that this shift to digital it's actually happening already. Africa now accounts for 70% of the world's $1 trillion worth of mobile money value transactions. Very telling, of course, is that Africa mobile money transaction jumped up from $495 billion in 2020 to $701 billion in 2021. That is a jump of almost 40% year on year, 2 years ago. As a tech business, we've learned a number of lessons over the years in terms of technology and the building blocks that are needed to execute on that digital vision. I'd like to discuss 3 important technology attributes as you commence your digital journey. But before I run you through these 3 items, let's just pause for a second and contemplate what was said earlier. So the African continent has 1.4 billion people. That's roughly, and with roughly 60% of them being below the age of 25. There currently exists a massive opportunity for simple, light touch, life and non-life insurance products. And that scale can only happen sustainably with the use of proper tech. Okay, so what are the architectural attributes of a tech stack for this journey? Firstly, any technology choice must be cloud-based, sometimes referred to as native cloud or full cloud. Unless the technology is native cloud, there will always be a friction between where you want to go as a business and the structural limitation of your technology stack. Cloud-based technologies have many attributes that lend themselves better for use in a digital journey. You see, they provide full scalability. You can grow. Maximum availability, it's always available due to the sort of failover array setup. Accessibility, and they are secure. I'll explain the security side now. You see, you can spin up an additional hardware resource easily with little to zero lead time. Due to the hardware array of a cloud setup, you can create full availability and accessibility from anywhere. These environments are backed up across multiple pieces of hardware across multiple jurisdictions, so losing data is a thing of the past. And if configured correctly, using cloud allows for the securing of the environment through one access point, for example, also with multiple firewalls which you can add on, which are being updated every few minutes. We mitigate against worldwide threats identified. You can have some comfort that this is constantly being monitored. Gone are the days of doing this in-house with a server room in your basement, on-premise install, I think it was referred to. I think that's old school. That's Nokia stories. I mean, if you wanted to set up a medium to high performance hardware environment in your business today, assuming that you have a server room in your basement, you can expect a lead time of 3 to 6 months on processors, SSD drives, hard drives, memory. With cloud, I could have the same environment set up for you before the speech ends. I mean, it's truly incredible. So to illustrate cloud-based technology versus older legacy technologies, I'll use one example. I'm not sure if any of the people in the audience like cars, but I'm a car guy. So from 2015, Mercedes S500, top of the range, well, not top of the range, you got the AMG, but you know what I mean, had the technology and did process sufficient data points so as to allow the car to keep the correct following distance from the car in front of it. It was called adaptive cruise, while still keeping in the lane. I think it was called Distronic Plus. This allowed for what is called partial autonomous driving. Mercedes today, so 8 years later, does not have full autonomous driving. So they had partial autonomous driving in 2015, but they don't have full autonomous driving today. So why? You see, Mercedes was collecting those hundreds of thousands of data points every minute. The limitation, however, was that due to the legacy software stack, they captured and stored these data points locally on the car. They were using an older technology stack, non-cloud. And although it was super reliable, it was limited in this fundamental way. Mercedes at the time, 2015, had a balance sheet of 88 billion euro. They could have pivoted, but they didn't. Tesla today has full autonomous driving. You can get in, punch in your destination, and the car will navigate you to your destination without you touching the accelerator or steering wheel. Tesla in 2015 had a balance sheet of $8 billion, basically 1/10 of Mercedes at the time. So how does Tesla get it right and Merck doesn't? Well, there are various contributing factors to Tesla being able to beat Mercedes to autonomous driving. But primarily, Tesla is a completely different tech stack to that of Mercedes, a full cloud or native cloud tech stack, which means it works differently. Autonomous vehicles, a little side fact, generate as much as 40 terabytes of data an hour. This is from the cameras, the radar, and the hundreds of sensors. Just in context, that is equivalent to 3,000 years of average iPhone use. Every hour. I mean, it's mad. There is a whole other discussion around data and storage, but Tony said I only had 30 minutes. The big difference, of course, being that where Mercedes was collecting terabytes of data points, they were storing them locally, or in later years sent limited info. The Tesla, however, being native cloud, was uploading this information from the get-go into a central computer that currently boasts a memory processing bandwidth of 2 terabytes a second. It's an absolute beast. In fact, Tesla announced in August 22 that it had the 7th largest supercomputer in the world. You see, and it needs to be. All Tesla cars are feeding all their data points to Tesla's mothership supercomputer called Dojo. And with these troves of data, Dojo is computing hundreds of billions of variations of different road traffic behaviors every second. Using AI tools such as machine learning and neural networks, Tesla is forming a better picture every minute on how to ensure that your Tesla car drives safer. It will send the updates to you at night while you sleep. I mean, it's truly a different world. So, long story short, ensure that you are using a native cloud developed technology stack. The second learning, wherever possible, use a technology solution that allows you to perform all the functions end to end for all your products, both life and non-life, in the same place, on the same system or platform or technology stack. If not totally possible, then a recognition in your business that this is where you want to go, and limit the number of technologies used or make sure that they can integrate with each other. As illustrated above, it is suboptimal if you have to step out of one technology into another to perform a business function. You see, if you're performing all the functions of your business, both life and non-life, on the same system, you can record, you can store, you can use, you can compute all these data points simultaneously. You are gathering and interpreting information consistently, like a Tesla, to a central place. If there are any pricing specialists in the room, they'll be rubbing their hands because they understand what that means. Okay, so we have to perform all the functions centrally, quoting, underwriting, onboarding, fulfillment, servicing, premium collection, automated reconciliations, claims management, reporting, posting of financial transactions. If you have all this set up, then you can immediately see with this alignment, you can drive product rules immediately into this architecture, just like Tesla sending you an update at night. You can make changes on the fly. You can create a product. You can distribute it. You can change it. You have the flexibility. Importantly, you can sell and distribute digitally. You can administrate digitally. You can take them on a digital journey. But where the real magic happens is because you have everything in one place, in a normalized database structure, you can add automation. Automation in our insurance world is incredible. You can gain orders of magnitude in efficiencies. Automation and AI is once again a discussion for another day. Tony only let me have 30 minutes. And then thirdly, an appreciation that sophisticated IT skills are in shortage in our industry and on our continent. So make it simple. Use a system which is predominantly configuration versus development. Let me explain. So when developing a piece of functionality for the first time, a software engineer or developer or programmer can choose to hard code the functionality item, or develop the item in such an agnostic way that it is configurable to be used at a later stage with modified business use cases. Perhaps a simple explanation, the same as if you hard code a number into an Excel document versus using an equal for a changing variable. It takes a bit longer for you to configure the variable versus the hard code, but the Excel spreadsheet is more powerful and will have a longer longevity. It can be used in more applications. Developing with later configuration permutations in mind, it's time consuming. In fact, much more time consuming. Depending on the requirement, it could be 8x more challenging and time consuming. The advantage being that if done correctly at the outset, it significantly reduces the amount of time later to deploy the function, almost by the same factor, 8x. Perhaps for a further example, imagine a large DB board, the electrical board that is found in most of our homes. The DB board is where all the circuits meet. In the DB board, you can flick up a switch to switch on your stove. That is configuration in an IT world. Development, on the other hand, is equivalent of putting that switch into the DB board. So you have to run a wire from the stove through the kitchen wall, through the ceiling, and then chafe one wall. It comes with a lot of effort and with a lot of risk. See, while they're installing that stove switch, someone touches another wire in the roof and that causes a short. So now you have to test the various lines to find the issue. So basically, favor a configuration toolset in your system of choice. It will de-risk the project. It will also allow for the training of staff on an already existing piece of functionality. But the biggest attribute is that when you flick that switch, it works. So in South Africa and on our continent, we desperately need to train up, educate, and build up significant internal skill within our organizations so we can create a sustainable insurance ecosystem for all. I mean, if we have what we have today, which is a 2% on average insurance penetration rate on the continent in terms of skills and resources, and we are targeting a 14% penetration rate, that is a growth of 5x. So we have to rely on the heavy lifting technology for some of it, but we also have to rely on our people. Thank you for your time today, everyone.
So we're first going to go over to Amritha to give her an opportunity to bring a little bit of information as she sees it from the TransUnion side. Amritha, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, everybody. I trust you can hear me clearly. I think listening to Tavio, my mind's racing because there's so much to do in quite a quick pace of time. But the truth of the matter is, if we just think about it holistically, right? There's no denying that we literally live in a digital age. The pandemic obviously amplified this as more individuals like myself and a whole host of others were kind of forced to go online. Businesses were meant to literally keep their lights on, and in order to do that, over the last 2.5 odd years, digital channels, online applications, web, etc., was all the order of business. So whilst all of this sounds super exciting, it also introduces a fair amount of opportunity, but equal risk to insurers and a whole host of other businesses. And the important thing is to understand, how do you navigate through these times to make sure that as was mentioned earlier, you don't want to become a Blackberry that was once in the limelight and now forgotten. How do you keep ahead? How do you balance the risk? How do you balance the client experience? How do you balance the whole application of digital? And how do you do it in a very safe and trusted method? And if I just have to lay the picture of how digital transformation has changed the fraud landscape, and in fact the financial or anti-money laundering and criminal landscape, we're noticing that the bad actors, the syndicates, they're already ahead, 2 steps or 3 steps ahead of whatever happens. They're always scanning the horizon, and they're always looking at ways to manipulate and exploit vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And if anything, the pandemic crystallized that organizations and institutions and insurers alike have to be really focused on how protected their channels are, but more importantly, how do you create and foster that emotional connection with your consumers? So a lot of trust was talked about, a lot of making sure that our revenue is up, revenue leakage is down, market share is penetrated. But the reality, what we've actually seen statistically is between the period of 2019 to 2022, as digital, globally, digital transactions amongst our customers increased by 80%, likely we saw the volume of suspected digital fraud attempts increasing. So it's almost a 1-to-1 ratio. And the question is, so now that we know that, what do we do about it? And if I just double click into the insurance industry alone, we've seen that at least 22% of suspected fraud attempt rates changed in percentage in that same period between 2019 and 2022. So if we've looked at how do we do things differently and how does all of this line up, it's important to note that as individuals and as consumers and individuals wanting to take up insurance, short-term, long-term, as well as institutions providing this, the consumer expectation around digital transactions, first and foremost, is instantaneous gratification. And in the insurance environment, that's a little bit difficult to try and make sure that you make a good decision, you manage all of the risks, you make sure all of the underwriting is done, you make sure all of the checks and balances are in place to give a very quick turnaround of outcome. You know, you're either accepted, denied, or in between. And so some of the things that really shape digital interactions that we're often compared to are the likes of Amazon and Uber. You know, they sound so good, they sound so sexy, they sound so quick and easy to operate. But at the back end, there's so many technologically driven risk frameworks, APIs reading a whole host of stuff, from behavior to application to data to all of these things to come with a quick and what appears to us an instantaneous decision. And we love that, right? So when we are being compared to all of these really cool, sexy, first in breed digitechs, the question is, how does our brands favor? So as insurers, how do consumers favor our branding when it comes to their digital experience? And also, what does best-in-class digital capabilities look like? It's kind of trying to understand how do you do a superior job in integrating digital and physical environments, because that's the order of business. And secondly, how do you foster that emotional connection with your consumers that we term trust? And the further observation is that a good onboarding experience is directly proportional to driving customer loyalty and, of course, repeat business. Now, we've also heard a lot in the last half an hour around fragmented technology landscapes. And that's a fact, right? We're not in utopia where you literally have the ability to switch on a business that's superbly technologically built with the best in breed risk indicators and an absolutely superb client experience. It really isn't that. We're living in a world where you've got legacy systems, where you're also trying to understand the new way the world is morphing into, and you're also trying to grow your digital arms and legs within the businesses. And of course, the other challenge, apart from it being fragmented, it's super silo driven. So businesses operate as mini businesses within massive insurers, for example, and that's the order of business, right? So if you look at the perfect storm, all of these ingredients to introduce risk and vulnerabilities that are easily exploited by bad actors as well as opportunistic individuals. And the challenge from a fraud landscape is you have clients that you take on as individuals, like as an Amritha, but I could be doing things to get my activation over the line. I could be fudging information, I could be inflating claim payouts when something happens. And those are all practical things that become super difficult to start disseminating legitimacy fudging or fraud or manipulation at play. And there's a fair amount of that occurs, and there's a fair amount of it that literally goes into your revenue leakage line. Coupled with that, you've then got very, very smart syndicate play, where fraud attacks happen. They happen quick, they happen fast, they happen in a catastrophic manner. And if you look at how much of information we personally share on a lot of social media channels, social engineering then underpins all of these types of fraud that come up. So I'm sure you're familiar with phishing, when links are sent to you pretending to be authentic companies, only to realize that they spoofed and they're going into a fraudulent database, and you innocently and naively providing all of your information, and thereafter it morphs into either account takeovers, application fraud, and a whole host of attacks that the innocent individual is left in the dark. The insurer, as an example, has no idea. And then more importantly, there's a whole host of losses and revenue coming through. And then, of course, if you tie all of that together in a very manual, fragmented, silo-driven world, whilst trying to build digitally, how do you then introduce things like automation, robotics, AI? And how do you kind of have a blended approach to get that type of execution going, and automation and digi shouldn't really be fear factors. It should really be, how do we embrace things? There's so much of stuff to be done. So how do you automate simple and easy and repeatable tasks while allowing complex processes to be performed and actioned by human specialists? There's a bit of place for both. Now, what does this all mean, right? And how do we bring it all together? We know for a fact that consumers prefer businesses that protect their personal data. And that is such a massive thing, with a whole host of protection of personal information, with information regulator really coming down hard on the duty of care we need to take with this very important information. How do we make sure we have that as top of mind when we running our businesses, when we're building new channels, when we're looking to go hybrid, digital versus manual versus a fusion of both? We also know in some of our TransUnion surveys that we've done that 78% of our respondents prefer organizations whose online experiences protect personal data. So individuals are saying, I don't mind the necessary steps to protect and give me the peace of mind and safety while engaging with you. In fact, I don't mind if you provide and ensure a very secure online quote system, as an example, in the insurance world. Or more importantly, they don't mind applying multi-factor authentication. You see it all the time within an onboarding or an application process. And in fact, a lot of them are saying they prefer that because they'd rather remain vigilant as opposed to being attacked for vulnerabilities by bad actors. And then the question is, how do you build all of this into your journey? Because on the one side, you understand your risks really well, you understand your landscape really well, you understand the weaknesses pretty well. You're operating in a fragmented world, you're operating within silos, and everything needs to come together in an ecosystem literally within a blink of an eye. So how do you manage to reduce that friction? How do you make sure that you apply that right level of security to manage and identify risks up front? How do you manage that preventative strategy that makes sure that in this era, you're bringing on the right business, and you want to make sure it's a good balance between good, at TransUnion, we call it friction right, and how do you make sure it's seamless and done in the background and then with quite a quick turnaround time? And more importantly, how do you spend time rather frustrating the fraudsters or individuals with manipulation and fraudulent elements in mind? How do you balance that? And lastly, how do you make sure that the financial information that is being shared, as well as the personal information, is tamper-proof, it's secure, and for example, when individuals are applying for a product, they log into your application, be it on your app, be it on your online web channel. How do you make sure all of that is correct? And then we know that as consumers, we want consistent experiences. So what does that mean? Whether we look at going and having a sale over the telephone, whether we go in store, whether we do it online, whether we do it on our app, how do we make sure that the omni-channel experience is the same? It's consistent. It supports all of the stuff that keeps me awake at night. And more importantly, how does that help insurers like yourselves understand these are all the main factors that we need to consider. Now, how do we build that into our customer journey? And how do we make sure that at the end of the day, we're bringing in the good customers, we're weeding out the bad customers, our walls are super strong and strengthened, our security layers are great, even though we're working in a fragmented world and in a silo environment. And lastly, one of the key points that was discussed was transparency, right? How do you be super transparent in what you're doing? And how do you utilize data? Because data plus technology is sort of the sweet spot in finding the balance between a dazzling service and client service and experience, as well as managing risk, and then more importantly, providing a really cool experience that doesn't ask for too much, that abandon rates are then not an issue, not taken ups are not a massive issue that impacts the books. And more importantly, you want to be that flavorful brand that clients are willing to walk the journey with you, more from a cradle to grave type of process. So really, it's about properly balancing the fraud protection elements with the customer experience in a very layered approach, because there isn't a silver bullet, there isn't a one size that fits all, there isn't an understanding of a spray and pray approach. It's about really understanding your data, understanding your strategies, understanding your client behavior and experience, fusing that together to get to a place that provides comforts for all. And so when you look at it, it's almost combining a very comprehensive approach, in balancing all of this. So if we have to understand what's important, when you're engaging either in a face-to-face environment as well as a faceless environment, it's understanding that identity and establishing that identity is indeed who they say they are. We've got the traditional identity of Amritha as a person with an identity card, book or passport, but you've also got your digital identity. So when you're interacting digitally, your email is important, that's your digi identity. Your mobile number is important. The device that you're utilizing to interact is also very critical to make sure that it is clean, it's not abused, and there isn't any signals or bad information that allows you to make good decisions up front. Identity proofing is important. Fraud prevention strategies are important. And more importantly, I guess it's making sure that this layered approach supports good experience, supports good interaction, and a successful outcome. And then if any of these solutions flag or verifications flag certain things, what do you do with it? What are your policies in place that allows you to either stop that straight through processing, because there's far too many red flags. As an example, if your photo or your biometric mismatches to home affairs, that's a critical red flag. That could be identity theft in the making. What do you do with those things? How do you then manage your policies to look at stuff that's sort of not sure yet, but you need to do a little bit of eyeballing or manual verification or underwriting to continue? And then what's your very happy part that supports a really cool straight-through processing? So if you put all of that together with the right analytics, with the right insights, with the right tools, with the right customer acquisition strategy, you definitely and most probably working toward combating and keeping up in an ever rapid changing environment. And I suppose the last thing I want to really make is a digital journey is not a journey really around having the best in breed solutions as well as the best in breed customer journeys. It takes an entire ecosystem to get it right, and it takes buy-in from individuals. It takes senior C-suite executives driving that mission, strategy, and purpose from the top. And it also takes a culture of saying, we're going to try things, we're going to be smart and responsible about it, and each level of the journey or the cultural levels are going to be supportive and driving these things, because a system is just a system. And if you're going to use a system but not put anything into it, you're really going to get yourself defeated. So it's just a combination of all of these things in a hyper growth world, in a hyper rapid digitalization world, and not to mention a hyper fraud risk world. And so in a nutshell, I suppose that's some of the information that I was prepared to share with you. So thank you for listening.
Amritha, thank you very much for that fascinating discussion. I think, of those three building blocks that Tavio mentioned, data plays a role in each of those building blocks. It's sort of almost like the essence of each of those building blocks, because everything levers around that. And then, and we'll get to unpack a little bit further, but we spoke about a digital strategy, a digital journey, and we're talking about an omni-channel, which means that it's almost like an holistic approach. And what is interesting in terms of what you've said now is that you can have weaknesses in any stage of that whole thing, which is why your input was so important, because at every stage one has to keep that in mind. But we're going to build further on that with comments from Robin. Thank you very much for also being available to share a little bit with us. Robin, VP of International Insurance at TransUnion Africa. I look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you, Tony. Everyone, I'm actually standing in for Robin Farrell, my colleague, who's at the Insurance Summit, the TransUnion Insurance Summit in Chicago. I'm Robin Wagner. I look after the insurance practice for TransUnion, and that practice spans 8 regions. So I hope today I'm going to share a little bit about what I'm seeing across those 8 regions, and I hope it resonates with you. Great themes today coming out from Tavio's discussions around trust, because technology and use of data really does require a big trust element. And Amritha talking about the consumer's expectation of having a trusted engagement and relationship with insurers. It's great to be talking to South Africans today. In my experience of working across Canada, UK, Colombia, Chile, Brazil, India, Mexico, those are the markets that we're currently active in. South Africa is one of the most progressive in terms of adoption and use of technology and data in the life cycle. So it's great to be speaking to you all, you advanced bunch. So, the business model of the insurers has certainly been evolving over recent years, and I think a number of key trends are accelerating that evolution. And I'll talk to a couple of these. We won't have the time to go into all of them, but the cost of living crisis that affects so many of our regions, and including South Africa, is a primary driver causing insurers to change, to adopt new practices of automation, digitization, and use of data to drive efficiencies. So just to give you some stats in terms of what's happening here at home, based on research that we see on the South African Bureau, based on transactional data and submitted data by insurers, I would estimate we see about 80% of the direct insurance, no, sorry, we see about 100% of the direct insurance traffic in South Africa. And when you bring in broker and the move to underwriting platforms, we probably see globally in South Africa or South Africa wide about 80% of all transactions. But so we've seen a transactional drop year on year, 22 on 21 of 6% drop in transactions to the Bureau looking for data to use that data in the quoting process and provision of prices back to consumers. Year to date, that's down 15%. So when we look at the total active base of policyholders in the country, that is stagnated. It's sitting at around 1.2% minus. So it's pretty flat. Many of insurers have lifted premiums in line with inflationary pressures. Premiums are up an average of 7%, but cancellations, there's also pressure on cancellations as those are up nearly 20%, moving from 2.1% to 2.5%. So when we run our pulse survey in South Africa, consumers are all worried about inflation. 55% of South Africans that were interviewed regarded inflation as of a very high concern. So we've got a lot of these pressures at the top of the funnel within a lot of our businesses, and I'm sure you're all aware of that. I'm sure you're all seeing that within your own businesses. But my view, it's not all doom and gloom, right? What did Warren Buffett say? He said, when everyone's greedy, be wary, but when people are wary, be greedy. So I definitely think there's opportunity to excel and thrive in these difficult circumstances. But these circumstances, top of the funnel, are certainly putting pressures on or accelerating insurers to change and evolve. And when we compound that pressure, so you've got the top of the funnel, your revenue, and revenue cures everything. And at the bottom of those jaws is costs, and the largest cost for an insurer is claims. And those jaws are now narrowing, and there's margin pressure because claims inflation is driving up the cost of claims processing and claims payment. And to Amritha's point, claims fraud is another big driver of cost pressures within insurers. So what are insurers doing about this? So in our studies and our experience, nearly 70% of insurers in the UK, in South Africa, and many other markets are changing their claims processing environments. They're automating those claims processing environments for a number of reasons. That FNOL decisioning needs to be as data backed, as fast to process the 98% of good claims and trap the 2% of bad claims, right? Every time you handle a claim as an insurer, that drives up cost. Right? So reducing the false positives whilst reducing the false negatives is a key with claims processing. And we see many insurers, UK, Canada, South Africa, now issuing significant RFPs for claims management systems that are fed by complex algorithms and data elements to ensure green channeling, the experience for the good customers is good, but and the processing of claims, the costs are reduced but that fraud is stopped. So those pressures, top of the funnel, bottom of the cost pressures are certainly accelerating what we see globally, automation right across the claims lifecycle. And I just want to sort of add to the fraud pressures here. So in these economic conditions, these challenging conditions where money is tight, that creates very strong motivation for the bad actors to commit fraud. And we're seeing an increase in fraud right across all our insurers and insurance markets. I came across a stat the other day that the cost of insurance fraud is estimated globally to be $310 billion a year, or approximately 12% of the claims cost. And insurers traditionally have said, well, actuarially, we'll create a model, we'll increase and create flexibility for that suspected fraud in our pricing strategy, and we'll trap the claimant fraud, right? And I think that thinking really needs to be evolved. I came across, I spoke to a lady called Anne Green in the UK last week, and she initiated device risk analysis in a large insurer in the UK at point of quote. Device indicating the identity of the device connected to each policy being incepted, each quote and each sale. The IP address, the location of the device, whether that device is connected to fraudulent devices. She said within 6 months of implementing that solution, they were able to stitch together that certain policyholders were linked to the same device. So different identities, different new business policyholders were linked to the same device. To such an extent, they stopped so much syndicated fraud and ghost broking at the front door that the claims ratio of that business shifted by 500%. They were earning 1 penny in the pound at the start of the process, and after 6 months, without any other significant changes within the business, 6 pennies in the pound. So digitization, automation, use of data, multifaceted data elements to reduce cost in claims processing, in managing and servicing policies and mitigating fraud is key. And I don't want to take up too much time because I know we're over on the hour, but I just want to talk about the weaponization of data. And hats off to South African insurers, because South African insurers have been using very sophisticated data in their pricing models, I would say for nearly 15 years now. And prior to that, underwriting used to be a manual process, right? We used to, there would be an underwriter that would assess the application for the piece of insurance business. And that was fraught with inconsistencies, whether the underwriter was having a bad day, had a hangover, had a fight with husband or wife or the children, that was really affecting decisions. So use of data, standardized algorithms, the industry had to trust those to make informed pricing decisions. And these pricing decisions are now changing at an incredible rate. I mean, if you look at in the UK, the street pricing teams are literally adapting pricing models on the fly as risk conditions change and risk conditions of existing portfolios change in almost near real time. And that's going to have to be a reality, I think, for many insurers. Long gone are the days where we rebuild a model every 2 years. We're going to need to develop the platforms, the technology, and the sophistication to adapt our pricing strategies, to select the preferred risks, price for those preferred risks, and balance that intake of business against changes, dynamic changes within our portfolios in as near real time as possible. South Africa and many insurers have already displayed the trust in data and technology to assist in that process, and that will really need to continue. So that's it from me. Conditions are tough at both ends of the income statement for many insurers in many regions, but that doesn't mean we can't succeed. It is just it's a trading condition that I don't think we need to be bleak about, but I think we must look for opportunity within, and many of those opportunities sit within data, analytics, and automation. Thank you everyone for your time, and thank you for Cover Magazine for putting this very insightful, collaborative meeting and discussion together.
Thank you very much for that, Robin. Very, very interesting. If you don't mind just cutting your sharing, then
yep,
we can. There we go.
Off.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. Yeah, lots of threads that connect between the different discussions. I think I've got some questions and so on as well that we could start tackling. But I just wanted to check in, I mean, one or two things. I think it was great to see the thread being drawn through. You know, we're talking about digital strategies, and we're talking about a digital journey. And then Amritha spoke about the omni-channel as well. It's almost as though the whole thing, there's no start and end. It's a journey. It's a sort of how long is a piece of string? Now, maybe just starting with Tavio, how do you plan your strategy with you have milestones and you have implementation dates, etc., but you don't really have a real end. It is going to continue. It's a continuous process. How do you see that when you're building a digitization strategy?
I mean, Tony, that's a good question. It's something which everyone struggles with. But perhaps by way of context, you know, I've said it before, like Apple has literally got all the money in the world. They have like a balance sheet of like almost $300 billion. And they did not give us iOS 14 in iOS 1. And I think that is the illustration of the fact that this is very much a journey. I think people really struggle with that because they want an endpoint in this digital experience, in this digital sort of process that they're going through, where they start somewhere and there must be a definitive endpoint. And there is no definitive endpoint, because as you reach whatever you determine to be that definitive endpoint, new functionality, new data, new attributes, new software, and new structural enhancements into the framework, like 5G or satellite. I mean, all these things change all the data points on which you premised your journey or your technology, which it's constantly changing. So there is no sort of definitive thing. But what I try and do, or what we try and do, is, you know, acknowledge from the outset that this is what it's going to be. So there cannot be a misalignment where we say we're going to be on site for 6 months and then that's the end of it. there will be lesser on site in year 2 and lesser in year 3, but we, that's just a constant thing that will continue to enhance. Don't know if that helps your answer, Tony. I know you wanted me to say definitive end, but there is
no. yeah, that is. I don't know if you have any comment on that, Amritha or Robin.
Yeah, I mean, a comment from my side, Tony, would be I echo what Tavio said. As open an architecture as possible, because it is a journey. You're not going to solve everything from the outset, and where to focus, where are the biggest significant pain points within the business. What needs to be addressed first? Is it a claims processing issue? Is it a pricing automation issue? Interesting. Just on that pricing. So the life insurance industry has a quote process which is incredibly outdated. Lots of questions, fraught with anxiety. Got to go and see a nurse or a doctor, pee in a cup, give blood. It's not a great process, and end to end can take 3 weeks. We're seeing transformations there with adoption of technology and data, and credit-based scores that allow insurers to straight through process applicants in near real time. So it's the technology's there. It can fix many parts of the life cycle, but where's the biggest pain point? More people through the door faster? Do you need to stop fraud at the back end? Do you need to reduce claim processing expenses? That's where you need to focus your technology. That's as open architecture as possible. So as your needs evolve, you can integrate those needs and those new platforms into that architecture.
Amritha, just drawing this a little bit through to your side as well. When Tavio spoke a lot about the silo stuff with existing tech stacks, and then the different sort of divisions in a company working with the data in a different way, etc. And then other companies getting into the new way of doing it with having a tech stack in the cloud, fully cloud-based, where all the data can be accessed universally through this. How do you find the different approaches when it comes to, for instance, your specific area of fraud, to handle the fact that difference between somebody who's got these different silos with different tech systems and then somebody that's got a system that the data is housed in a single space and utilized by the whole tech stack?
Tony, the reality is the latter, where you have a single view of data lakes, data information, client information. In fact, a single view of a client or a profile of a client is literally one of the best and most strengthened weapons in fighting against the fraud and financial crime era we find ourselves in, and it's going to continue growing and not lessen, right? So that's obviously what we would love to work toward and almost call it utopia. Because when you look at things collectively and you bring it all together from an ecosystem, and you're able to have a single profile of Tony at an insurer and then level that one up to a consortium view of looking at Tony in the industry as well as within an organization, that is really great. And fraudsters and syndicates and smart bad actors don't have the time to break down all of these barriers, right? It's about getting in quickly, understanding the vulnerabilities, exploiting it, getting the biggest bang for buck and moving forward. So the best space is ecosystem view, wide macro, and everything brought together. However, the truth and the reality is, as businesses are, there's the elements of legacy, silo divisions, and that makes it a lot more easier to introduce risk. And hence the view of omni-channel, the view of a strengthened security system, the view of making sure your customer journey is soft, it's unobtrusive or intrusive rather, less intrusive. But at the back end, there's a lot of checks and balances through APIs and modeling and algorithms happening in parallel. You know, it doesn't have to be sequential, multiple things happening in parallel to produce a result within milliseconds. If you wrap then data, as well as structured data, unstructured data, and then of course, alternate data and behavioral data, you can still manage in a very safe environment through a fragmented world while you're building toward your end state journey. So there isn't a hard yes or a hard no. It's how do you manage and navigate, and what sort of strategies are you seeing? And more importantly, what's your data telling you? And what is your client behavioral elements telling you? Not just within your organization, but at an industry level as well. So it's a combination of both as you walk toward your plan, but underpinning a whole host of variables and data points to help you navigate.
Mm-hmm. Robin, you've got a comment to make?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I mean, just pulling on Tavio's earlier point around the veracity, velocity, and volume of data that Tesla are managing and processing. I mean, we see that in insurance pricing, in insurance fraud management. So the more diverse and multi-pointed the data points are, that are available to assess, that are trusted, that are there to assess the risk associated with either an applicant or a claim, that is only set to increase. So having a tech stack that is process and storage scalable is critical, because the volume, veracity, and velocity of data is only set to increase, and we as insurers need to adapt our infrastructure to consume as much of that in the decision-making process, and whatever that decision is within the customer lifecycle.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Tavio, anything that you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of what we have been discussing, but we all know it, like the pricing teams 15 years ago were utilizing different data points to today. And there can only be an assumption that 5 years from now, different data points will be utilized again. But what both Robin and Amritha are saying are spot on, almost in the sense of where you have to have a central nucleus of a system or a functionality tool set or a core of 5 or 6 systems all integrated together. But however you design it, the acknowledgement that not only are you going to be wanting to bring a client onto a digital journey, but in order for you as an insurer to become more efficient in your operations, you have to have the ability to be able to check and work with that data in a very quick and seamless way on the fly. So, you know, almost this concept where you do a report 3 months after the fact in order to establish your profitability or establish your claims experience, or I mean, that's once again, that's old school, man. You need to be able to do that calculation in real time. Because of the what Robin mentions now, this almost influx or this velocity increase in terms of what you have to do, you almost, if you don't do it at that speed, well, 3 months after the fact, it might be, you might have lost quite a bit of money already because you were unable to establish a trend or unable to determine, in Amritha's case, some sort of a fraud that is hitting your organization. And you can utilize the data that Amritha has got available to you in order to do a first pass on an anti-fraud calculation on a particular application or at a claims pace, at a claims process stage. And not only Amritha's data points, but all sorts of data points. You have to be agnostic as to where you get them from, but you must be able to get them, and you must be able to utilize them. You must be able to make decisions with them. So this whole discussion, end-to-end architecture, all of this, I mean, that all is obviously the gold standard, what we're all striving to. But today, as we operate, the recognition that all these things are hitting us, and with the data, we would be able to fine-tune our organization. I like Robin's example where you got like that steel trap, and there's just like a compression on your profitability. You have to then pull levers. So what levers do you pull? You have to have data in order to pull levers. You have to understand what you're trying to do, and good data. So yeah, man, it's all tied in one with the other. There's no silver bullet, Amritha. You've said it many times. It's just a constant looking at your process, looking at your software stack, looking at your data and saying, well, you know, we don't have health data. Can we get health data from somewhere? Oh yeah, you know, some of our guys have got Fitbit devices or Garmin devices. Okay, how would we incorporate an integration with Apple Health in order to suck some of that data in to utilize that information? Or we create an app, let someone walk around for a few days, you're tracking their steps, you understand what they're doing, you understand their movements. I mean, you can really, you know, Tesla's the good example. I mean, 40 terabytes of data every hour. I mean, it's crazy, and that's a lot of data. And we as insurers are in a perfect position. Well, I'm not an insurer, but the industry insurers is in a perfect position to be able to utilize a large plethora of data sets in order to really get the pricing right and to try and avoid fraud, which, as Robin says, can move the needle in many of our worlds.
Yeah, I mean, this conversation just has so many angles. Luckily, I mean, we've got later today, we've got Kali Bagari from the data company that's going to unpack, and he's the title of his presentation is going to be My Data, Your Data, Our Data, and it's going to be quite interesting because it's just the data is such a fascinating thing. And then tomorrow we've got the whole AI thing, which is obviously AI is simply whole stacks of data that is used in a specific way. So we're going to unpack that. Somebody asked a question about cost in terms of brokers, etc., and that we're not going to unpack that now, but we do have old Hanno from Arda that I'm going to corner tomorrow about. He's from Brisk. I'm going to corner him on cost to brokers in terms of systems and all of those sort of things. But maybe just to, in closing, you know, we've been doing a tech conference, and this conference sort of morphed from, as technology developed, it was a small part of the bank assurance conference 13 years ago, and where data played a very small role and technology played a very small role in the discussion. This is obviously morphed over time, but I remember at that time banging the drum with people to say to them, when you're collecting data from new clients, whether it is for a funeral policy, whether it's for a credit life policy, whatever, because that's a lot of bank assurance business, collect as much data as you think might be relevant for yourself in the future. But people didn't know what to do with the data at the time. They could collect it, but they had no warehousing, they had no place to put it. They had no way to extract it again, to actually work with it and make sense of that data wherever it is now packaged away. And that meant that 10 years later, certain data that they realized if we only collected this data 5 years ago, it would have been a game changer for us. Now we have to start going back and collect data from clients that we never collected. So it's such a big thing in terms of your strategy to plan how you're going to work with this, where you're going to put it, how you're going to be able to extract it, what relevance will it add for you in the future. And those are all strategic discussions as to the direction of the business, the model of the business, and so on. So it's such a big and important conversation. So I look forward to unpacking that further over the next 2 days. And then maybe just a last anecdotal comment, Tavio, in a conversation you and I had a while ago. I discussed about, you know, technology and the cloud-based system is now relevant to every single business. And Robin spoke about customer expectations changing and the demand from customer expectations. And that's in every business as well, because of the fact that people you might sit in a business where currently you think it's not relevant, or you think that you can manage without, but a customer that goes onto a Netflix platform, he has a certain experience. And when he comes to you, he wants that same experience, regardless of whether you've never offered it or never told him that you're going to give it to him. That's just become sort of almost mandate. And if I look at cover and our business, we today have to provide 4 to 5 times the amount of benefit to our clients at the same price as we provided to them in 2018. And the only way that we can do that is to go cloud-based and to have platforms, have tech that will assist us. So the world is changing, and everyone needs to look at their little area and business and decide, how do you actually fit in? How do you make sure that you're sustainable? So yeah, the journey continues. But thank you guys. It was great to discuss with you and to unpack this a bit. And I hope that we'll be able to get comments from everyone as we go over the next sessions and in the next 2 days.